if you focus on the next funding round, you can promise to an investor sitting in Silicon Valley कि मैं 15 मिनट में डिलीवरी कर दूंगा इन श्योर. They've never been to Karachi, they've never been to Lahore, उनको नहीं पता सड़कें खुद ही होती हैं. So उनके उस पर वो तो मान जाएंगे आपकी बात कि आपने क्या आप कह रहे हैं आप कर लेंगे. But eventually, who will you do that on the backs of? We will just start with this very basic question. Who are we disrupting? I think is the title of the event. So what is disruption? Okay, breaking through the monotony, breaking through the routine, doing something new potentially. Anyone else? Going against the status quo. So similar sort of एक तरह चीजें चल रही हैं and how can we do something differently? ठीक है. Anyone else? Yes, for sure. The traffic outside. Anyone else? Chaos. Interesting, yeah. Say so kind of combining these, we're doing something new, going against the grain potentially, which might cause some chaos, some pain, and that's sort of like where we're together sort of defining disruption. Do you want to talk about this a little more?
I think the interesting thing, मैंने जितना डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग को गलत इस्तेमाल होते देखा है उतना ही डिस्ट्रप्शन को होते देखा है. जिस तरह डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग एक पूरी की पूरी वो हम कहते थे जंतरी बन गई है कि आप उसको खोलेंगे उसमें से हर एक चीज़ का सोल्यूशन निकल आएगा. आई थिंक द सेम वे वी हैव बीन यूजिंग द वर्ड डिस्ट्रप्शन in our work and the problem is that डिस्ट्रप्शन की एक पूरी साइंटिफिक डेफिनेशन है. और अगर आप सबसे पहली चीज़ देखें, आपने जो डेफिनेशन बोली है उसमें कभी भी पॉजिटिव कॉनोटेशन नहीं आई है. अब देखें, आपने क्योस के बारे में बात की, आपने कहा कि सड़क खोद दी है, आपने कहा सो एसेंशली जब आप सिर्फ डिस्ट्रप्शन को देखते हैं तो आपको लगता ये है. अगर आप डिस्ट्रप्शन, आई वाज टॉकिंग टू ओली लास्ट नाइट अबाउट दिस टॉक एंड देन आई वेंट इन एंड आई लुक्ड एट के डिस्ट्रप्शन का जो लफ्ज़ है उसका इस्तेमाल कैसे इन द लास्ट 100 years हुआ कैसे. सो आप देखेंगे कि डिस्ट्रप्शन का जो वर्ड इंग्लिश में है वो ऐसे, उसका पिछले 100 साल में उसका इस्तेमाल ऐसे है और फिर 1980s आते हैं तो वो ऐसे चला जाता है और 80s के बाद वो ऐसे स्टे करता है, फिर ऐसे ही रहता है. एंड इट्स नॉट शुडंट बी अ सरप्राइज के 80s में क्या हुआ. अगर आप IBM को देखें, माइक्रोसॉफ्ट को देखें, एप्पल रेवोल्यूशन को देखें, सो द होल आइडिया ऑफ डिस्ट्रप्शन केम इनटू बीइंग, बट इट वाज ऑलवेज डिस्ट्रप्टिव इनोवेशन. डिस्ट्रप्शन कभी भी अकेला इस्तेमाल नहीं होता था. इट वाज ऑलवेज विद अ वेरी स्पेसिफिक इनोवेशन जो डिस्ट्रप्शन के साथ अटैच होती है, जिसके अंदर एक साइंटिफिक थ्योरी है जिसको हार्वर्ड हमारे साथ लेके आई और 20 साल में हार्वर्ड ने, प्रोफेसर्स ने उसको बाकायदा एज अ थ्योरी इस्टेब्लिश किया और उस पर काम किया. So I think what we need to be very careful, in my opinion, when we talk about disruption and disruptive innovation, we need to go back to the scientific definition जो business community में exist करती है. कि disruption ये है कि हम नई market create कर रहे हैं, या disruption ये है कि हम bottom of the pyramid के अंदर लोगों को affect कर रहे हैं जहाँ पे existing players are moving upwards. So I think मेरे ख्याल में जो भी हम discussion करें आगे, we'll look at this sort of more operationalized definition of disruptive innovation कि यार वो है क्या.
I think most of us haven't read sort of the definitions, scientific sort of literature behind it, but we will go from what how we've seen the term being
Absolutely.
used. और उसमें clearly the way the term has been used is often how people have described it. So it kind of becomes a bit of amalgamation between balancing use कैसे हो रही है term, लोगों को पता कैसे, and maybe there's an actual definition, and how do we sort of talk about both of them. अच्छा, इसमें we did a quick sort of poll on our Instagram a while ago, जिसमें हमने पहले भी पूछा कि 2-3 सवाल थे about disruption. One of them was what entities who do you associate disruption with? Let's say tech startups हो गए, bigger tech companies हो गई, maybe traditional businesses or something else. Like what do you guys think? When the word, let's say, innovative disruption comes in, or tech disruption comes in, what sort of entities do you think of?
Tech bros.
Sorry?
Tech bros.
Tech bros. ठीक है.
Bros.
Anyone else? Fintechs. Right. So tech अभी तक common है. Anything else? Startups. What we decided from our sort of poll that we did on Instagram, but also somewhat there be discussions, they tend to go towards tech. किसी ना किसी किस्म की fintech, tech companies, startups was mentioned. उसकी वजह से we'll sort of keep it at tech startups. Also potentially a relevant sort of sector for this community. So let's imagine a tech startup. Just the first tech startup that comes to your mind. What does it do? Neobank, Airbnb, ठीक है. Anyone else? WhatsApp. Communication, sort of housing, banking, financial. Anyone else? Kareem, ठीक है. Ride hailing. Sorry? Jugnu, ठीक है.
TikTok.
TikTok,
Yeah.
yes. सही है. So very common. I think all of us probably know all of these, at least know of them. अगर नहीं भी इस्तेमाल किए. ठीक है. So this is sort of a quick glance of what we think of as startups. किसी ने grocery delivery service नहीं किया, लेकिन मैं एंटी डेमोक्रेटिक हो गया हूँ यहाँ, तो I will decide कि we will go with grocery delivery service. And the whole purpose of this is we'll just do a quick sort of experiment using an example, ताकि हम लोग जब बात करें about different scenarios, we have something to refer to. Has everyone used some sort of a grocery delivery service over the last few years? Okay, that's good, because I just wanted to pick a sector where, or a type of service that everyone's used, so that we can all sort of imagine what that might look like. Let's see कि ये एक news है जो 30th April 2024 में publish हो गई है about this Pakistani startup. Can everyone read this? Deliveroo नाम है इनका. They've raised $100 million from US-based VCs. ये उनके tech bros हैं, celebrating their disruption. So this is just a quick news update. We will talk about this news going forward. Try to imagine what this scenario might look like. ChatGPT ने मेरे पूरी खबर भी लिख दी थी. If anyone's interested in reading the rest, you can.
Glasses free मिली हैं इनको race के साथ.
हाँ, मतलब इतने पैसे मिले तो. अच्छा, so what we will discuss, obviously the topic being कि who gets disrupted या who are we disrupting. So we can maybe take a step back and say कि अगर ये let's say this scenario is correct, उनको $100 million मिल गए VC funds funding से, और अब वो disruption करने चले हैं. So in this process, who is affected in what ways? Has everyone here heard of the term stakeholders? So if anyone hasn't, stakeholders may, it isn't just people who have sort of like who work in the company or who own shares. It's anyone who may be affected by the company existing या by an organization existing. Obviously, primary stakeholders में वो लोग आएंगे जो वहाँ काम करते हैं, उनकी चीज़ें खरीदते हैं. But also anyone else who gets affected is also a stakeholder. So we'll just go through the stakeholders for a company like this, and then see के different types of stakeholders पे क्या effects होते हैं. And you guys will tell me all of this. Let's say $100 million मिल गए हैं उनको, और उनके 3 co-founders हैं, रज़ा, ज़हाब और फरहान. Don't know any of these people. इनके ऊपर क्या कैसे effect हुआ of the $100 million? Where do we think they are from the saddest to the happiest? Happiest? Does everyone agree? कोई disagree कर रहा है इस पे? Full happiness हो गई है. $33.33 million each.
I mean, maybe a bit worried because now they have responsibility to their investors.
If they actually feel some sense of responsibility, they might move a little bit that way. So might be between 4 and 5 potentially. ठीक है. Obviously, if they raise that much, we can expect कि वो पहले से they had a core team, they had some employees, maybe CTO होगा, COO होगा, जो भी like maybe head of design या whatever, top level employees हैं that were working at the company. How are they affected? What would their mood look like? Any guesses? किस side पे जाएं?
I would think that they would be happy because for high level people who want them to be more optimistic.
Sure. So extreme right, fifth वाला पे या fourth? 4? Okay, more on fourth. ठीक है. थोड़े से कम खुश हैं क्योंकि वो देख रहे हैं कि उन्होंने Fortuner निकाल ली, हम सिर्फ Civic निकाल सकें.
e-tron भी निकाल लिए.
Is going from there, a little bit less happy. सही है. Other high-skilled tech workers and maybe also designers in Pakistan. How are they affected? How are we affected if
some of us here?
A startup here.
Huh?
Sorry?
Super happy.
Super happy. Say it.
I just think
Neutral.
neutral.
Okay. Don't care. Some people are super happy. Some don't care.
For the community, you can largely say कि यूजुअली टेकन एज अ पॉजिटिव न्यूज़ के यार चलो आगे चल रही हैं चीज़ें पुश हो रही हैं, यू नो लाइक
ठीक है।
चांद पे इंडिया गया लेकिन यहाँ पे पढ़े लिखे लोगों को मज़ा आया है, राइट? यू नो आप कहते हैं आपको क्या मसला है, यू नो चांद पे तो वो लोग गए हैं बट यू फील कनेक्टेड।
नहीं, यहाँ वो भी बहुत लोग हैं जो कहते हैं वो CGI है।
हाँ वो CGI वो एक ही कहता है।
फॉलोअर्स बहुत हैं, let's not go there.
Yeah, exactly.
अच्छा, so generally speaking we're saying कि around 4 type, is that fair?
Yeah,
So
that's
ठीक है.
good.
Let's now come to maybe we're not really a tech company, but Ideate is a design firm. We're self-funded, self-sustaining. हमारे जैसी companies या other tech companies, maybe people here work at. How are they affected potentially with a startup sort of coming in with $100 million? Any guesses? Any experience with this? Worried? बहुत ही सही है.
Why? Happy?
ठीक है. Potentially where there's a chance of collaboration and integration, you might lean towards being happy. Where there isn't, you might feel left out of that sort of new sort of money coming in, या business coming in. So it could go either way potentially. Does anyone think कि बिल्कुल extreme end पे होगा? So does 3 work, like middle? Okay. One sort of again, I completely agree with basically all of these because it really just depends on how you are placed within that whole sphere. Next है हमारा, अच्छा let's say वो again grocery delivery service थी. आप लोगों के आसपास who buys their groceries या generally even sometimes buys things from a nearby store जो maybe tech centered नहीं होगा? Quite a few.
मोहल्ले के स्टोर से।
हाँ, अच्छा, and this is obviously a very cultural phenomenon as well कि हमारी, again this is a very privileged sort of segment of Pakistani society. हमारे भी लेकिन लाइफ्स काफ़ी डिपेंडेंट है अपने पास के स्टोर्स पे. जैसे जैसे आप ज़्यादा जाते हैं आउटस्कर्ट्स में या देहातों में, तो एवरीथिंग रन्स अराउंड कि आपके आसपास क्या अवेलेबल है, स्टोर कौन सा है, दुकानें क्या हैं. सो इवन अ लॉट ऑफ दिस सोशल सॉर्ट ऑफ वो इंटरेक्शंस हैपन अराउंड दो स्टोर्स कि आप शाम को जाकर दुकान के बाहर बैठ जाते हैं और वहाँ लोग आ जाते हैं. And that's the sort of thing which, again, that most of Pakistan's experience of grocery shopping and shopping generally is that sort of mohalle ki dukaan ya jo bhi aapki hogi. How do you think those guys are affected by something like this? Very worried. क्यों worried होंगे वो?
Because उनका business कर लो.
सही. So it could be that they're fairly neutral, they don't really care, and in some cases where they might not have a long-term sort of reliable customer base, वो शायद थोड़ी वो उनको प्रॉब्लम हो competing with this sort of business. Any other opinions on this?
Going to take them a lot of time to even shift from this model to that model, because yes, like personally they might be worried because वो fear of unknown होता है, fear of technology exists everywhere, especially in markets where education and digital literacy is low. But regardless of that, if somebody launches this right now, I mean, some of the grocery apps that we know of, right? They have been around, I don't know, 6-7 years at least now. But still, they are not there. Still, they have not replaced the traditional stores.
Got it.
So maybe like it might take 25 years to get to that point where their fears come true. Who knows if they would be alive by then or not.
सही. ठीक है. So you're saying कि इतना ज़्यादा affect करने के लिए, at least at scale, they probably require much more time and they haven't been able to do that yet. सही है. Anything to add on this point?
अगर आप for a second hold करें इस चीज़ को कि ये grocery store नहीं है, right? And you have traveled all the way up के करीम के या उबर के ओनर ने पैसे रेस किए, उसके बाद टेक स्टाफ ने बहुत खुश हो गया, जो एसोसिएटेड कंपनीज थी उनको उसको बहुत सपोर्ट किया, एंड देन यू गो टू द लेवल जहाँ पे रेगुलर रिक्शे वाला रिक्शा चलाता था, राइट? और उसका रिक्शा अप टू डेट नहीं था, उसकी चेकिंग नहीं होती थी, उसको मोबाइल ऐप इस्तेमाल करनी नहीं आती थी. There were like 15 different factors all the way which you can list down, and all of a sudden somebody else comes in, जो कहता ये है कि वो डिलीवरी वाला मॉडल है, प्लेटफॉर्म इकॉनमी आ गई है, और अब all of a sudden one rickshaw has a advantage on the other one, and एक दिन पहले वो same level playing field के ऊपर थे. And then when you look at that, it sort of changes our point of view who would be affected in this case.
Where it might sort of affect them even more, and we've sort of done some sort of work on examples of this, is when you have funding coming in, which you can rely on, which you don't need to sort of, you can invest without making that money, क्योंकि वो पहले investment पहले आती है. For traditional business आपने चीज़ें बेचनी है, उनमें से profit में से खर्चे निकालने हैं, फिर पैसे रखने हैं, ऐसा करके you like अच्छा मैं एक नया बंदा employ कर सकता हूँ. तो if you have to compete with a business that can suddenly do all of that without having to make that money, that can be really difficult to do.
One thing we're not talking about is how tech dependent the customers are.
Yeah.
In the bigger stores, you would imagine the more expensive stores, you would imagine that people would be more tech dependent. And then in the little grocery stores, you wouldn't imagine that people would be as much tech
Yeah.
dependent. So I think the customer base and how tech dependent they are matters.
For sure. I think this also relates to जो हम पहले बात कर रहे थे कि let's say people like us, if the startup funding hopefully goes back again to the levels or beyond the levels of a couple of years ago, most of us, I would imagine, would benefit in some way with increased salaries, increased opportunities, and similarly better services. Like because we use a lot of our services on the phone, most of us will be beneficiaries of better services, चाहे वो ride hailing है, चाहे grocery delivery है, whatever. And again, potentially the people who might get left out are people who aren't quite in our maybe socioeconomic educational strata. But actually, let's break it down further. This is sort of related to the last one. Has anyone seen people who might, I know there are a couple of people here who worked in sort of this industry, but deliveries, फर्ज करें एक बड़ा यूनिलीवर या कोई जो है इस तरह की कंपनी, उनकी चीज़ें पहुंचती कैसे हैं एक छोटे स्टोर तक?
The whole system is, of course, they have an inventory and they have a whole warehouse, and that also has a system where they manage all that inventory. But then the distribution goes in like two folds. One is the order taking process, and then the other is, of course, fulfillment and delivery. So for some zones, they have their own cargo system which goes and delivers. But for a lot of, because they are delivering all over Pakistan, right? So then they onboard other transportation companies who take their logistics and deliver that.
Got it.
Yeah.
ठीक है. So if let's imagine कि this startup that raised this funding partners with Unilever, and their own teams, जो भी delivery sort of that Unilever manages, all gets onboarded onto this app and is part of this new ecosystem of even distribution वाली side पे getting the products. Are there people who get left behind there as well? Yeah. Do you think that generally speaking, everyone should be able to get onboarded?
What they look for is what incentive you're giving us. And apparently convenience is not one of their major priorities. They don't really care about that as much as people like us do. For them, how much profit margin there is, how much discounted rate they can get, how quicker can they deliver that stock is what matters.
Got it.
So at the end of the day, there will still always be a lot of percentage of retailers and distributors who wouldn't want to go digital.
Take it.
And also because of some other, financial reasons that they have that they don't want to be accounted for.
Got it. ठीक है. So there's some left would remain out of the system. You're saying mostly voluntarily because they don't want to be part of it. Do you think उसके अंदर there's any division between maybe अगर distributor की बात हो रही है, the company again उनके भी top level कोई management होगी या owner होगा, them and the teams that distribute, do you think they would have different incentives or different reasons?
You cannot ever get 100% people or engagement or 100% onboarded
Right.
retailers especially. But at the end of the day, I think the distribution matters also in terms of the literacy that they have and in terms of convenience. So when I was doing all of this research, apparently those retailers have like 5 other apps that they use to order from. But at the end of the day, they don't care what the app is called. Their loyalty is with the price point. So that's all that they care about.
सही है. अच्छा, so again ये थोड़ा सा tangent हो गया था, but coming back to thank you for the detailed answers. Let's imagine कि अब ये जो network, I just wanted people to, because ये थोड़ा सा sort of less seen side of the business है, हमें front end तो नज़र आ रहा होता है कि दुकान पे चीज़ें आती हैं, आगे आती हैं, पर इसमें जो ये back distribution वाली side थी, इस पे let's imagine some distributors who are not onboarded, इस system का part नहीं बनते, Deliveroo के $100 million के venture का, are they affected in any way? Is that positive? Is that negative? Maybe second wala, they're slightly worried, maybe not too sad. ठीक है. I think there's a couple more just. अच्छा, ये मैंने like every other startup ये करेंगे काम KLI में ही, वो भी शायद पहले उस सिटी से स्टार्ट करेंगे जहाँ के वो टेक ब्रोज होंगे, सो बट लेट्स अज्यूम के KLI में है, उधर जो हमारे मे बी रिलेटिवली हायर इनकम कस्टमर्स हैं, what do you think, how are they affected by a delivery startup coming in, spending $100 million on their tech and delivery? Positive, negative? It's positive? बहुत खुश हैं या थोड़े से खुश हैं? बहुत खुश हैं, ठीक है, बहुत खुश हो गए, ये ईजीएस्ट आंसर था सबके लिए. अच्छा, उन्हीं सिटीज़ में potentially lower income customers, are they affected in any way? And how is that positive, negative, neutral? Neutral?
नई कंपनी आई है, उसने अपने प्रोडक्ट्स पे डिस्काउंट्स ऑफर किए हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल जैंगो हैज ऑफर्ड काफी
Mhm.
and if those lower income customers can get that then I think they'll be happy then.
सही है. So
They're getting their products, the ones they want at a lower price than usual, right? And if they're lower income, that's always more disposable income for them.
Mhm.
So considering this logic, they might be happy.
So if there are enough discounts offered on products that they want, then they can sort of take advantage of those discounts. ठीक है.
But it could very well be that I am a startup who want to create a new market.
Yeah.
Right? जो आप बैंकिंग में बहुत कॉमन देखते हैं कि एक बैंकिंग फैक्टर ये है कि आपने सुलेमान को कैसे कन्वर्ट करना है बैंक ए से बैंक बी में.
Right.
और एक बहुत बड़ी मार्केट ये है कि जिसका पहले ज़िंदगी में कभी बैंक अकाउंट नहीं था,
Yeah.
उसको आपने बैंकिंग कैसे करनी है.
Unbanked
राइट? सो अगर आपने उसके लिए बैंकिंग करनी है, जो मेरी स्ट्रैटेजी है और वो ये है कि यार अकाउंट फ्री है, घर आके बायोमेट्रिक हो जाएगा, दुनिया की हर सहूलत आपको दे देंगे, बट कम ऑन बोर्ड. सो आई थिंक द पॉइंट वॉज कि इन दिस वे it actually become a good news also for lower income because
Right.
they might never have, they wouldn't have an access to this kind of facility, but because I can afford to bleed,
Yeah.
and I will bleed, and this will allow other customers to
Discounts,
come
right.
on board. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it might depend on a little bit on what their strategy is, and it could go either way. Does that mean overall neutral है? Are we leaning one way?
Neutral, I
Neutral
think.
कर ले. ये वही KLI के बाहर जो customers हैं, if they're only offering them in KLI, what do you think they feel? Again, neutral, negative, positive? Neutral. And lastly, what's the effect on the environment, on the planet? Very sad.
पेट्रोल लगेगा, उसके वजह से environment पेट्रोल की रोड्स खोदना शुरू कर देंगे.
रोड्स खोद एंड में मसला भी आता है, रोड्स खोद देंगे. सही है.
And also the packaging and the branding and presenting it in a very presentable way.
Right.
A lot of paper,
हाँ, the amount of wrapping around every delivery is just insane. This is where we are by the magic of science. We gave these ratings to all of these stakeholders. Are there any patterns here that we should look at? What does it say about those $100 million coming in? That's the pattern that we see quite often, and if we break down like real examples that we have, at least from what we've seen in our little analysis or thoda sa anecdotal evidence, we feel like actually people like us, mostly working in the right space at the right time, usually benefit, और हमसे ज़्यादा जो और भी privilege शायद हों, वो और ज़्यादा benefit कर रहे होते हैं. And eventually a lot of the promise around how this money will be spent, what foreign direct investment like this means for the country, that doesn't quite pan out in the ways that it's often discussed. So I think one other thing that we were thinking about in this pattern is कि privilege वाली चीज़ तो है, but within all the categories that are on the right side, बहुत कम लोग हैं उधर. Like the percentage of Pakistan population that is on those sides is very, very little, and the percentage of the population that's on this side is the vast majority. So eventually, while in our circles, the fact कि अच्छा किसी को 100 million मिल गए, किसी को 50 million मिल गए, seems like big news. It seems like कि अच्छा कुछ बदल रहा है. Eventually, most of Pakistan either doesn't care or remains unaffected or is negatively affected. And that becomes, I think, a very important point for people like us to consider who might be beneficiaries in one way or the other.
Right, so once you got the money, इसकी concentration is easy. इसका जो trickle down effect आने में बहुत time लगता है. और अब किसी भी आपने Airbnb की बात की थी, just look at the trajectory they had. आपने WhatsApp की बात की थी, look at the trajectory they had. So although it was a startup, because आपका startup scale ऐसे exponentially करता है, but उसके बाद भी the first billion, the second billion आने में time लगता है. Right? Maybe some exception YouTube के अलावा जिसको 2-4 बिलियन में खरीद लिया गया था. Money is the easy part. After the difficult part, money becomes an easy part, and the difficult part is to deliver that. And because we don't have that mindset very often in the founders community to deliver, because the money comes and then we have other goals, we are suffering all the way else, and then it's become a very different definition of disruption. It becomes a self cannibalism actually. You know, आप अपने आप को destroy करना start कर देते हैं.
Raising the next fund is the thing that's celebrated the most in Pakistan.
Yeah.
The celebration isn't around कि यार हमने अब इतने लोगों की ज़िंदगियाँ आसान बना दी हैं. None of us really know any of those numbers, right? Like वो किसने कहाँ सुने हैं. But we all sort of vaguely know कि इसने इतने पैसे raise कर लिए हैं. And that's where I think that really points to कि incentives गलत हैं. कि आप अगर आपका गोल ये है कि पैसे रेज कर लिए हैं आपने, स्टार्टअप क्यों बनाया? क्योंकि पैसे रेज कर लिए हैं. पैसे रेज किए थे, दैट शुड बी द स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट. उसके बाद यू शुड डू द थिंग दैट यू गॉट द मनी फॉर. आई एम होपिंग कि सेकेंड सॉर्ट ऑफ जब भी साइकिल ऑफ फंडिंग वगैरह हो तो वी लर्न सम लेसन्स. आई एम एप्रीहेंसिव बिकॉज एज सून एज यू स्टार्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस देयर विल बी 16 पीपल दैट जंप ऑन यू सेइंग कि आपने स्टार्टअप बनाया पहले. यार मैंने कभी इंटरनेशनल क्रिकेट भी नहीं खेला, फिर भी मैं शायद अफरीदी को आउट होने पे गालियां दे सकता हूँ. दैट्स नॉट, यू डोंट नीड टू बी क्वालिफाइड एज दैट थिंग टू बी एबल टू से यार ये गलत किया. बट आई एम व्हाट वी आर होपिंग विद दिस डिस्कशन एंड मे बी एज अ स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट इज जस्ट टू बी एबल टू सॉर्ट ऑफ रीफ्रेम कि व्हाट्स द थिंग टू सेलिब्रेट. लाइक अगर ठीक है, बहुत अच्छी बात है, वी होप मोर फंडिंग कम्स इनटू पाकिस्तान, बट दैट शुडंट बी द थिंग दैट्स द एंड गोल एंड द सेलिब्रेशन. Even when startups eventually fail, that's perfectly fine. Like most startups fail around the world, but maybe then critique कि क्यों फेल हुए, अगली बार क्या बेहतर कर सकते हैं. बट इफ़ यू डोंट लेट द रूम फॉर क्रिटिक एंड यू जस्ट से यार उन्होंने पैसे तो रेज किए थे ना यार, उससे इन सबको क्या फ़ायदा हुआ. लाइक आपको तो हो गया और 14 लोगों को हो गया, पर what benefit came to the rest of us, and that I think like might be a useful point to get on.
And I think इसमें important चीज़ ये है कि आपने मार्केट के अंदर एक बहुत गलत ट्रेंड भी सेट कर दी है. जब आप इकोसिस्टम को things are working fine, but then you disturb the ecosystem because वो क्या रहा है कि people are working, market की एक छोटी सी example है, market की एक salary slab है. So unsaid market ने agree कर लिया है कि this is how the growth looks like in this market, right? So what happens all of a sudden, an outsider comes in and tells, you know, you've been underpaid for a very long time, I give you 100x more or 50x more. And so what you do actually, you create this exceptional pool जो कि स्किल वाइज एक्सेप्शनल नहीं है, बट आपने उसकी एक्सेप्शन का टैब लगा दी है, आपने उसको पुल आउट किया और आप उसको आसमान पे ले गए 6 महीने के लिए और साल के लिए, राइट? एंड देन वो भी आपकी बात में आ गए, उनको लगा ये कि दुनिया चेंज होने वाली है. सो यू दे गॉट लिफ्टेड अपवर्ड्स, एंड देन आपने उनको ऐसे नीचे नहीं लेके आए, आपने उनको ऐसे छोड़ दिया. जब आपने उनको ऐसे छोड़ा तो फिर वो यहाँ भी नहीं रुकते हैं, वो ज़मीन पर चले जाते हैं, राइट? एंड देन वेयर द एथिक्स आर, you know, who are we disrupting? If you're saying कि आप डिस्ट्रप्शन मॉडल ये है कि आपने कम्युनिटी को बेहतर करना है, आपने इकोसिस्टम को बेहतर करना है, आपने लोगों को बेहतर करना है. सो व्हाट वर यू थिंकिंग व्हाइल डूइंग दीज थिंग्स? एंड सेकंड चीज़, यू नो अली, जो आई थिंक वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट है यहाँ पे रेस करना, वो ये है कि हु इज सफरिंग इज द पीपल एट द बॉटम ऑफ द पिरामिड. एब्सोल्युटली. आप कोई बड़ा स्टार्टअप उठा के देख लें, वो लॉजिस्टिक्स के अंदर है, वो हेल्थ केयर के अंदर है. अब एक डिलीवरी, लेट्स नॉट टेक द नेम, बट एवरीबडी नोज who the orange is and who the red is. So you know, अगर and who the pink is. So अगर आप देखें, आपने point A से point B पे चीज़ डिलीवर करनी है. Look at the number of accidents on road. Look at the
चलान्स का पूछना,
number of challans. You know, we got an official data. जो highest number of challans आते हैं वो आपके पास in riders के आते हैं, ठीक है? उसकी वजह क्या है? Pressure to deliver on time and before time. Thus there is no regulatory framework in this country. उसका नुकसान क्या होता है? It becomes our responsibility as founders to make sure that we ensure the regulatory framework in our companies, because the country and the system is not ensuring that. Because the government of Pakistan is not going to come and tell you कि आपने rider के लिए ये insurance चाहिए. Here we are sending people without helmet, without traffic, without front light, upwards and asking them to deliver without having any ethical framework and showing me these bloody numbers and telling me that we have 1,000 deliveries in a day. Thank you very much. Where do we stop?
I think उसमें there is I think वो incentives वाली चीज़ वापस जो होती है, if you focus on the next funding round, you can promise to investors sitting in Silicon Valley कि मैं 15 मिनट में डिलीवरी कर दूंगा इन श्योर. They've never been to Karachi, they've never been to Lahore, उनको नहीं पता सड़कें खुद ही होती हैं. So उनके उस पर वो तो मान जाएंगे आपकी बात कि आपने क्या आप कह रहे हैं आप कर लेंगे, but eventually who will you do that on the backs of? The same people जो आपकी फील्ड टीम है. Similarly, whatever any sort of इस तरह के network system that we create, जो discounts आएंगे वो इसलिए आएंगे कि you're not paying your labor enough, या फिर जो आप so basically the people who are suffering, उनकी basis पे people like us usually benefit because we're getting the discounts, we're getting quicker deliveries. And I happened to be in a position about a year ago to ask a company similar to my very imaginary example, and they told us कि यार हम इतनी अपना delivery time half करने लगे हैं. And I was like, मुझे नहीं चाहिए, किसको चाहिए ये delivery time half? Like, I don't understand. Like, all of us have lived our lives not expecting कि मेरा condensed milk 10 मिनट में घर आ जाएगा. Like, it's fine. Like, 20 मिनट लग जाए, 25 लग जाए. But they're like, हम कर रहे हैं. और again, क्यों कर रहे हैं? क्योंकि next round of funding is promised on the basis of showing the numbers कि हमने deliveries इतने time में कर ली हैं. And that again is perverse incentives that you're building on top because आपने promises कर ली हैं क्योंकि आपका goal next round of funding है. उसमें कौन सफ़र करता है, कौन ये लेफ्ट साइड ऑफ द स्केल पे होता है, वी डोंट रियली कंसिडर. एंड आई थिंक दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ बिकम्स द थीम कॉन्स्टेंटली. वी जस्ट लुकिंग एट द पीपल लाइक आवरसेल्व्स ऑन द राइट साइड एंड सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंकिंग फ्रॉम देयर पर्सपेक्टिव्स. आई थिंक पैटर्न्स हमने काफ़ी डिस्कस कर लिए हैं. आप लोगों से भी मैं पूछना चाहूँगा कि who is getting disrupted in all of this? Delivery you के $100 million में who is getting disrupted the most potentially?
The founders don't have skin in the game. I think the question to ask here is, if the founder is using his own service as well. Because if the founder has $100 million, he's not going to use that service for delivery. He's going to go tell his Batman to get him stuff.
Yeah.
So अगर वो खुद use नहीं कर रहा, he has no incentive to actually improve the service. People who are going to use the service, उनके लिए. So I think incentives should be designed in a way where the founder suffers more if his service goes down.
Yeah, the founder has no repercussions from their service not working well. So they're not really वो skin in the game उस तरह से नहीं है. पैसे भी अपने नहीं है, सर्विस भी आप कोई खास इस्तेमाल नहीं करते, और अगर सर्विस नहीं चल रही तो आपका काम तो हो जाएगा.
I think I'll just take a sort of more 2 minute के लिए academic lens on this. कि one of the takeaway from this talk could very well be whenever we talk about innovative disruption, we really go back to the theoretical model also, because उसकी बहुत बड़ी वजह ये है कि हम जब इन लेबल्स का बहुत गलत इस्तेमाल करते हैं. हमने देखा है कि डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग कैसे अब्यूज़ हुई है. अब यकीन करें आप, मतलब अली हमें, अब मैं डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग की वर्कशॉप करवाता नहीं हूँ. मुझे कोई कहता है डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग नहीं लेता, हमारे मैं कहता हूँ मैं डिज़ाइन ड्रिवन इनोवेशन करता हूँ. वो कहते हैं वो क्या होती है? मैं कहता होती डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग है, बट वो आप वाली नहीं है. वाई? बिकॉज पीपल समहाउ रिलेटेड दैट कि आप आएंगे, आप 4 घंटे इस कमरे में बैठेंगे, अब दीवार पे स्टिकी नोट लगाएंगे, उसको उतारेंगे, उसको इकट्ठा करेंगे, उसको लाल रंग को ग्रुप करेंगे, और यू नो व्हाट, डिस्ट्रप्शन हो जाएगी. दैट्स हाउ वी हैव टोन इट डाउन टू. लिटरली 4 घंटे, 2 घंटे की डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग के अंदर डिस्ट्रप्शन हो रही है, 8 घंटे हो रही है. एंड देन वी हैव वर्क फॉर कंपनीज जहाँ पे हम लोगों ने 6-6 महीने, साल इस प्रोडक्ट को समझने में लगा दिया. बिकॉज डिस्ट्रप्शन वॉज नेवर एन इवेंट, इट वॉज ऑलवेज अ प्रोसेस. You don't disrupt in a day. You keep on disrupting in your process, and it keeps on happening. You have a good day and you have a bad day. So I think we all need to go back to that definition and call people कि इस तरह design thinking का हाल किया है, बराए मेहरबानी innovative disruption का वो हाल मत कर. Second चीज़, it's also very contextual. जो for example Harvard Business Review कहता ये है कि Uber is not a disruptive innovation, right? क्योंकि वो जो classical definition है कि वो उस मार्केट में गई जो बॉटम ऑफ द पिरामिड थी, और यहाँ उसने नई मार्केट क्रिएट की, या वहाँ मार्केट, या इट वॉज टू बैड दैट द बिग प्लेयर्स वर नॉट इंटरेस्टेड इन दैट एंड द स्मॉल प्लेयर्स लाइक ऊबर वांटेड टू बी इन दैट मार्केट. इन द केस ऑफ सैन फ्रांसिस्को दैट्स द केस. दैट्स नॉट द केस. यू नो, वहाँ पे टैक्सी भी थी, वहाँ पे लोकल सिस्टम बहुत ज़बरदस्त चलता था, सो उन्होंने कोई इनोवेटिव डिस्ट्रप्शन नहीं की है. But when you take that lens to Pakistan, मेरे ख्याल में Harvard disagrees with me. I don't care. I think it's a disruption, right? Because यहाँ पे taxi system चलता ही नहीं था.
And I think just on a quick anecdote, वो design thinking की जो बात कर रहे थे ना, that's something we've also as ideate. I don't think we've used in any of our decks या bids, pitches for like 6 years at this point, because of how sort of just like misused that word became. और वही वाली चीज़ के people expecting कि 3 घंटे की workshop होगी, मसले सारे हल हो जाएंगे. उसका most extreme example, again, without naming names, not a delivery service, like but a really large corporation in Pakistan, they reached out to us, I think on a Wednesday, yeah, on a Tuesday, saying that Friday ko we have this workshop day with all our executives from all over Pakistan, paid for in like a nice resort. Can you come run our design thinking sessions where we will decide our 5-year strategy? And I'm like,
अब lucky हैं.
मैंने अपना पूरा career नहीं खराब करना with like, then I helped you decide your 5-year strategy in a 3-hour workshop while knowing nothing about your company. But the fact that they thought this was useful was a huge red flag for us in terms of like working with them on design के just that misunderstanding. और I think वो disruption का भी थोड़ा सा इसी level का problem बन चुका है. We have very, very innovative people doing amazing business in Pakistan, making a lot of money, actually disrupting positively. लेकिन वो they don't fit our definition of innovators या entrepreneurs because we have also imported those definitions. कि आप वही करेंगे तो आप startup हैं, आप यही करेंगे तो आप entrepreneur हैं. And I think that's where a lot of problems come in. And this is actually the case with India as well. There's quite a bit of critique that's starting now in India क्योंकि उनका थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा mature startup culture है, startup ecosystem है. So they've been sort of reflecting a little bit more on कि अच्छा frauds क्यों हो रहे हैं, overvaluations क्यों हो रही हैं. And there was a really nice report published a few months ago where it breaks, मुझे exactly भूल गए terms, but they break India down into 3 audiences. तो उन्होंने फिर one of the things that they studied was कि startups जब अपना startup funding के लिए किसी को present कर रहे होते थे, they would quote India's population of whatever 1.3 billion या something, जैसे कि ये हमारी potential audience है. And then what this report did was they broke the population of India down into monetizable population, potentially monetizable population, non-monetizable population. And that's when, if you see India that way, वो कोई 200 million लोग भी नहीं रह जाते. That could potentially ever be startup customers in the next 10 or so years. Again, I don't remember the numbers. But the point being, that's the reality of what those startups should be looking at. But when it's pitched to a startup VC sitting in the US, they don't know कि क्या dynamics हैं ground पे. And I think that again becomes, हम लोग थोड़ा सा exploit करते हैं उस चीज़ को कि उनको नहीं पता. पर हम लोग जो यहाँ लोग हैं वो सफ़र इसलिए करते हैं कि we are now applying this model that doesn't really work उस तरह से. Blitzscale आप नहीं कर सकते अगर आपकी 90% आवाम पढ़ नहीं सकती या 95% ज़्यादा आवाम कॉलेज नहीं जाती. तो आप एक प्रोडक्ट बना रहे हैं मे बी एड टेक का एंड देन यू एक्सपेक्ट टू स्केल लाइक मे बी वो खान अकेडमी डिड इन द US. एटलीस्ट यू शुड थिंक ऑफ लाइक क्या डिफरेंसेस हो सकते हैं. दैट्स वेयर आई थिंक लॉट ऑफ द मिसमैचेस हैपन कि हमने एक मॉडल इंपोर्ट कर लिया और हम उस पर बस पढ़ गए हैं कि यही करना है हमने. व्हाट डू यू गाइस थिंक अबाउट आवर रोल? अगेन आर का मतलब है एनीवन वर्किंग इन दिस स्पेस हु माइट बी एबल टू इम्पैक्ट सम ऑफ दिस, डिजाइनर्स, टेक्नोलॉजिस्ट्स, बिजनेस पीपल, मार्केटर्स. व्हाट इज आवर रोल apart from, again, founders भी हो सकते हैं इसमें.
So I'm just going to talk about the frustration of my role for a second.
Well, that's what we've been doing. ये venting session है, therapy हो रही है ये सब की.
Because we are talking about like ethics and we're talking about following a process and taking it in a systematic way, right? But all of these ideas for Pakistan, like design thinking or disruptive innovation, these are new ideas for everybody, right? Even in the tech startup business. So what my frustration becomes is first explaining to other external stakeholders, to other clients, what that process is, what that looks like, and the amount of resources and the amount of effort that's required to execute it properly. So that's one, right? Then the other one is someone in my position who's not at the top, but who's not at the bottom, right? Has some influence, who can convince some people with maybe research, with maybe my own knowledge or experiences that there's things need to be done a certain way. But after a certain point, that's it. It's redundant for them if they choose to make a separate decision, right? So in that case, what happens is a very skewed version of design work that we do. And it becomes very frustrating for us as well to do it in the timeline that we do it. And no one is happy. Right? But we say we follow this process, we've created something fantastic, and we really sell it. So it just becomes about us, it's just words at that point, right? So when we talk about our role, we can say that we want people to be more educated and we want people to be more understanding. But at the end of the day, if we look at it from a business point of view, I think the way to convince people is to show them how it can benefit them monetarily. For sure. And how that happens, I don't know, right?
Firstly, that's I think a frustration anyone who's been a designer in any sort of role here would have felt at different points. We still feel there's different versions of this. So for sure, like I think a lot of empathy in this room for that problem. There's a couple of things I do suggest around that, which I think really helped in my career over time as well. One, that's not going to ever fully go away. So expecting कि वो होगा नहीं होगा. But I think there's two things. One thing that designers need to do. I don't know how many of you have come across this concept of boundary objects, which is कि ये दो fields हैं, engineering है, ये design है, maybe ये robotics है, जो भी. The people who are able to innovate and get their work done, जो जिस भी field में वो हो, the best in this combined team are people who can sort of live on the boundaries of these fields. कि अगर जो robotics का बंदे के साथ अपने collaborate करना है या उनकी team के साथ, I've done work where we had teams with electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, again designers, or 3-4 और fields भी. I don't know any of the other fields, but I need to know enough to be able to talk in their lingo. If you're talking with a client जो tech background से है, I need to know enough about how their technology works to be able to tell them कि यार आप जब हम design कर लेंगे, again उनके ख्याल में design एक MS Paint होता है. Let's say I can't convince them otherwise. That's not my job there. What I can convince them is that this MS Paint being used will help you your technology become more usable for other people. And if I can convince them of that, that might be my way in to getting paid for design. Yeah. So that's sort of, you always have to figure out कि उनको क्या matter करता है. And that's what I think good designers need to be good communicators.
ये सिर्फ design का मसला नहीं है, ये हर जगह मसला है. I think what the discussion has gone beyond that. Problem ये है कि when the fundamentals are not right, हम डिज़ाइन को क्यों पसंद करते हैं और हम कहते हैं कि मार्केटिंग से क्यों फ़र्क है. उसके डीएनए में क्या है? उसके डीएनए में एम्पैथी है. उसके डीएनए में ये है कि यार हम जेन्युइनली किसी का मसला ये सोच के हल करते हैं कि हमारा मसला है. वी हैव स्टडीड दैट फ्रॉम अ वेरी डिफरेंट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, एंड इट्स नॉट अ ट्रांजैक्शनल रिलेशनशिप, इट्स एन एक्चुअली एम्पैथेटिक रिलेशनशिप. जब आप प्रोसेस में से वो चीज़ डीएनए से निकाल देते हैं ना, प्रॉब्लम वहाँ पर ज़्यादा आती है. बाकी अब यू कैन लिव विद दैट. यू नो, आप कहते हैं आइडिएशन ऐसे नहीं होनी चाहिए, ऐसे होनी चाहिए, ये नहीं होना चाहिए, वो होना चाहिए. देयर आर सो मेनी वेज यू कैन लिव विद. बट व्हाट रियली हर्ट्स यू एज अ डिज़ाइनर, यू नो, व्हेन यू थिंक कि आप जिस काम के लिए आए थे, जो आपका डीएनए था, वो ये था कि एक्चुअली आई एम कन्विंस्ड कि यार मैं यूज़र का एक्चुअल मसला हल कर रहा हूँ. बट व्हेन यू डोंट डू दैट, वहाँ पे यू नो वो जो रूह को तकलीफ पहुँचती है, एंड देन वहाँ बंदा becomes an activist. So I think वो मुश्किल काम हो जाता है.
और ये that same empathy sort of applies to the earlier point as well, where it's also empathy for other fields ना. कि अगर मैं एक फाइनेंस के बंदे से बात कर रहा हूँ, उसको मैं लेकिन बातें कर रहा हूँ डिज़ाइन की लैंग्वेज में, तो दैट्स ऑल्सो unempathetic of me. Again, not saying you doing it, I have done it much more in my early career. That's again part of the same thing. If we are saying that we're the ones who bring empathy into this thing, then we should have empathy for the people we're working with, and that also helps. There's been sort of a more open-ended discussion here, but in terms of the role, again, designers, technologists, कोई भी हो सकता है. What do you think we can do अगर, let's say you're working at a startup, again, I don't ever discourage anyone कि यार नहीं आप नौकरी ना लें, startups paying you well, you go earn that money, also try to work on that problem. उस case में like how do you're working at Deliveroo, उनको $100 million मिल गए हैं, you've been hired, what's your role there, what can you do, like क्या करें हम उस तरह की जगह पे जाके.
Me as an employer, I also often don't know okay, what is fair, or maybe like I have my own view of what is fair, but we have to ask the other person as well what's fair. And if we just like build that for ourselves, that's not enough. We have to maybe like create knowledge base. That's something that maybe my team could build up on after I'm not there maybe.
Yeah.
Nee, that's point. That's a very good point.
Sorry. This will come to you after.
So I just wanted to share this perspective that in order to play your role or even carry on that activism, instead of focusing on okay why this is not happening or why people are not listening to me, the energy should be channelized into getting yourself to a position where people hear you and they rely on you and they trust your opinion. So whether it's a startup or it's a corporate, regardless of that, first you need to get on that level and then focus on okay now I can do this.
I just wanted to say that as designers or people of privilege, I feel that it's our social responsibility to fight to create these frameworks, like he said, in the case where, you know, the government or the constitute is lacking. So I feel we are in the place of privilege to actually create that difference that we should be doing to, I don't know, like create more inclusive and equal communities.
Right. Yeah, for sure. If we are in that privileged position and we understand there's something wrong going on, at least try. I think one thing that I'll add to this is, there was actually a phrase, Hashmi, you might remember the State Bank person जो कहते थे boardroom versus salt mine. Yeah, so there was this phrase that we were working with somebody, we were working on a project with the State Bank. उनके एक senior बंदे हैं, उनका एक बड़ा pet phrase था कि there are two types of people working in Pakistan financial industry, people in the boardrooms and people in the mines. तो वो उसका मतलब ये था कि even in the bigger banks, you'll see some banks जिनमें पूरी teams में nobody really knows उनके users क्या करते हैं. वो किसी users से कभी मिले ही नहीं होते below a certain income threshold. Whereas there are some other fintechs and some other financial companies that are much more in the field. कि वो जाते हैं दुकानों पे भी जाते हैं, उनको पता है उनकी ATM मशीन इस्तेमाल कैसे हो रही है, उनकी point of sale वाला किस तरह हो रहा है. And that I feel like as designers, if we keep talking about users, understanding users, वो सारा, one of the ways also in terms of sort of convincing people of design, and I've sort of experienced that in my career in the past as well, is कि if you can convince people who otherwise might be very disconnected from their users to just go talk to the users directly, take them into the field for a day even. And this was at a previous company I was working in, was in agriculture, and we got our CEO and a couple other people who were visiting from वो CTO वगैरह बाहर थे, वो आए हुए थे. We just took them to a गाँव near Shekhupura to look at the farmers कि यार ये क्या कर रहे हैं, interact डेरे पे बैठे. And I don't know, like वो उसमें there was nothing that I can quote कि अच्छा इसके बाद उन्होंने ये करना शुरू कर दिया. But overall I felt like a lot of the discussion then was a lot more based on reality. कि अगर आप अपने वो बैठ के you're sitting in Boston writing code for the app that a farmer in Punjab will use, versus you've just gone to the farm once, your perspective now is very different to what that app now looks like. And that's something I think designers can also do. Just try to force people around us to, यार मैं field में जा रहा हूँ, आ जाओ साथ. And try to give them a little bit more of that sort of user's perspective, and hopefully, again, some people will never think about it the next day, but some people might at least have a little bit more of that empathy. Achha.
I think one more role we can do specifically in this local market is to create a community where we can actually empower each other as designers to actually bring this profession as an important one.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a struggle. Like one of the people from the back initially said that it's a struggle to get recognized.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle for an individual as well to come to that point. It takes time, it takes years of that. So I think overall the design community in our region specifically, I think we can build each other up. That's also a tangent of the role that we should be looking into.
That's extremely important.
So we'll wrap this up. You can get in touch with me on LinkedIn, Suleman on LinkedIn as well. And my email is ali@ideatinnovation.com. We should probably have had it on the last slide. I did not. But thank you for coming.
अभी तक पहुंच जाए, मैं तक पहुंच जाएंगे.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.